Today, let's talk about texture. And what is texture? Well, texture refers to how something feels. Texture words could be examples like rough, smooth, sticky, fuzzy, soft, or slick. So think of something like an apple. If you were to touch it, how would it feel? Well, it would probably feel smooth. If you were to touch a rocky wall or the sidewalk, it might feel bumpy or rough. So think about different textures that you might find in real life. Well, there's two types of textures in art. There's implied texture, and then there's actual texture. Actual texture is when you can actually feel something with your hand, such as a piece of sandpaper, or wet glass, or maybe animal fur. Some artists like to play with texture in their artworks, especially 3D art. For example, Marin Oppenheim in her Luncheon in Fur takes a teacup and covers it in fur. So it's pretty useless at that point. And she likes to play around with the texture because normally a teacup might be smooth, but now it's furry in this case. And that would make it really hard to drink out of. Jen Stark, another artist, uses sculptures, and sometimes they're made out of paper, sometimes plastic. In this sculpture, if you were to touch it, it might feel spiky on the edges or bumpy towards the inside. Implied texture is when an artist uses visual texture to make it look like it feels a certain way. For example, illustrators might use this in different kinds of lines they use to make it look like, for example, the hedgehog might look a little spiky or bumpy. The deer might look soft. This is actually a drawing of a rabbit. It looks like a photograph, but it's a hyper realistic drawing. And if you were to touch it, it would be a flat piece of paper, but it makes you think that it would be really soft. Van Gogh uses a lot of texture in his artwork, in his paintings. You can see in Starry Night, the cypress tree in the front has a lot of different kinds of wavy lines, and also same in the sky and in the background where the hills are. This week, you're going to learn how to create texture using texture rubbings. And I want you to go on a scavenger hunt either outside or inside your house, or even both, to find different things that feel a certain way. An example could be leaves that you might find on the ground outside. You could even use the sidewalk. If you're inside, you might use the bottom of a shoe or some coins. For third through fifth grade, you're going to create a non objective art composition using different textures. I would like you to divide up your paper into different sections using either geometric or organic shapes, and then in each section, I want you to use a different kind of texture. If you use crayons, you can also use watercolors with it. This is optional, you don't have to use paint, but if you have them, it really helps enhance the texture using different color theory. So apply what we learned right before the break with different color schemes and how you can create contrast, either with warm and cool colors, or maybe even complementary colors, the ones that are directly opposite of each other on the color wheel, to make different textures emphasize and stand out. The next video is going to show you how to get started.
Hey, today I'm going to show you how to make different texture rubbings. For pre-K through second grade, I'm going to ask that you make a texture collage. You are welcome to fold your paper into 8 equal sections by folding it in half, folding it in half again, and folding it in half one more time. And you want to try and find 8 different textures. You can find them outside if it's nice outside, or you can find them around your house. So I'm going to show you some different examples and how to make the rubbing. Now for third through fifth grade, I'm going to ask that you make a composition, a non-objective art. Non-objective art is when it's just lines, shapes, and colors. So you're going to want to divide your paper into different shapes. You are welcome to use a ruler. You can make up your own shapes and make organic shapes. You can use different kinds of lines to divide up the sections. And then in each section, I want you to use a different texture. And I'm also going to show you the painting watercolor technique with the crayon resist. So it works best with crayons if you also have watercolors. If not, you can use a pencil. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways. Now for pre-K through second grade, you don't have to do it this way. You can also just randomly make your textures around your paper. You could use leaves that you might find outside, but make sure the bumpy side is facing up, and you will just put it under your paper. I like to use peeled crayons that don't have a wrapper on them, because then you can lay on its side and rub the paper to make the texture show up. I think this way is easier because then it takes less time and it fills up the space a little faster. Now you can take different colored crayons and maybe different shaped leaves or different sized leaves and color that in. So leaves are one of my favorite ones to do, but you do not have to do that. You might find things more around your house, like coins. Coins actually work really well, especially if you have a pencil. You can take your pencil and just lightly draw on top, and you'll see them starting to come through the paper. And all that raised texture on that coin is starting to show up. You might find other random things around your house. Like I have a lot of seashells around my house, and I could use that. Of course, it's not as flat, so it might be a little harder to do. You might find different kinds of coasters. I know some people have like wooden coasters and other things that you could do. I like this one because it makes like a spiral. And you can overlap textures too. Like you could take a different color, use the same texture, and overlap them to make it a little more interesting. You can also use the bottom of shoes. These make really great textures because if you look at the bottom of your shoe, if you look at a different pair of shoes, it most likely has a different texture. So that's one. And I'm going to take this one and use the bottom of it. Maybe a different color. And rub that as well. And your goal is to fill up the whole paper. So like any of these side edges, you might take a different pattern. I'm going to take the long side of this shoe and place it down. And fill up the edge of my paper with it. Okay, so when you're finished, if you have watercolors, it's really fun to add watercolors on top of this. So I'm going to use my 3rd through 5th grade example that's already filled in, and I'm going to use contrasting colors. So if you remember the color wheel last week, you can think of opposites on each side of the color wheel. So if I have red right here, maybe I use some green to go behind it, and it will really make it pop out. And it's going to look dark at first while the paper is wet, but when the paper dries, it turns out really nice because all that white space is filled in. Now, if you don't have watercolors, that's okay. You don't have to do this step, but it does add a lot to it. So you can see how it's making it pop up because crayons are made out of wax, which acts as a resist to the watercolors. So make sure you're adding enough water to your watercolors if you have them. And that will help fill in some of that empty white space and really make your colors stand out. For example, this yellow right here, the yellow spiral I made, I might use purple behind it. And now you can really see that texture because before you could barely see it because yellow is such a light color. You don't want to use colors that are too similar or else that texture is not really going to show up. So like this right here, since I use black, I don't want to put black on top of it. I want to use a different color. And voila. And so you can create your texture rubbing masterpiece, and please upload it to Seesaw when you're finished.